If you've never heard of Nothing to Lose before, don't expect a traditional action thriller just because you've seen someone holding a gun in the trailer. At its heart, this is a story about a desperate mother pushed beyond every emotional limit imaginable. The movie asks a difficult question right from the beginning. What happens when someone feels like every legal option has failed, but the life of their child is still slipping away? That's the emotional foundation of this film. And whether you end up loving it or not, it's impossible to ignore the weight of that idea. Directed by Ludovic Kobo-Justin and Nawell Madani, this French drama follows Jada, a woman who spent years fighting just to become a mother. After finally having her son Noah, her world seems complete, but that happiness doesn't last forever. When Noah is diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer, everything changes. Doctors try to remain hopeful, but it quickly becomes clear that finding a compatible bone marrow donor may be his only real chance of survival. What impressed me during the opening isn't flashy filmmaking or big cinematic moments. Instead, the film spends time showing what ordinary life looks like before tragedy arrives. We see the emotional cost of infertility, the pressure it places on a marriage, and how deeply Jada loves the child she fought so hard to have. Some viewers may feel this first section moves slower than expected, and honestly, I can understand that criticism. The pacing is deliberately patient, focusing more on emotional groundwork than immediate suspense. But at the same time, I also think this slower approach serves an important purpose. Without understanding how much Noah means to Jada, the decision she eventually makes wouldn't carry nearly the same emotional impact. Nawell Madani delivers a committed performance that keeps the movie grounded during these quieter moments. Rather than presenting Jada as someone fearless from the beginning, she feels like an ordinary parent slowly being crushed under extraordinary circumstance. That gradual emotional transformation becomes one of the strongest aspects of the film because you can actually see hope disappearing little by little instead of all at once. The relationship between Jada and her estranged husband Paul also adds another emotional layer. Their marriage has already been damaged by years of stress, disappointment, and personal struggles long before the medical crisis begins. The movie doesn't immediately try to repair that relationship. Instead, it quietly shows two parents dealing with unimaginable fear in very different ways, and that emotional distance feels believable during the early parts of the story. As the hospital becomes the center of the narrative, the atmosphere changes noticeably. Instead of feeling like a place of healing, it slowly begins feeling like a place where time is running out. Doctors, nurses, and families are all trying to do their best, but the reality of pediatric cancer leaves very few easy answers. The movie doesn't present medical professionals as villains. Instead, it highlights the frustration of a system where even dedicated people cannot always provide the help families desperately need. That distinction is important because the film is less interested in blaming individuals and more interested in questioning whether society is doing enough for children facing rare diseases. By this point, I wasn't thinking about where the story would eventually go. I was thinking about how terrifying it must feel for any parent to realize that loving your child isn't always enough to save them. And that's exactly where the movie begins creating its strongest emotional connection before the story takes a dramatic and unexpected turn. Without revealing every major twist, this is where Nothing to Lose completely changes its identity. Up until now, the movie feels like an emotional family drama, but once Jada realizes that time is running out and the healthcare system can't give her the miracle she's desperately hoping for, desperation begins replacing patience. She makes a decision that instantly changes everything, turning a deeply personal tragedy into a national crisis. This sudden shift has become one of the most talked about parts of the movie. Some viewers will probably find it incredibly powerful because it shows how grief can push an ordinary person beyond every limit they once believed they had. Others may feel the transition happens too dramatically and stretches believability. Personally, I found myself somewhere in the middle. I completely understood the emotions driving Jada, but I also questioned whether every event that follows feels as convincing as the emotional setup that came before it. That doesn't mean the movie loses its purpose. In fact, I think this is exactly where the filmmakers want the audience to stop thinking only about one family and start thinking about a much larger issue. Pediatric cancer, rare diseases, donor shortages, and the emotional exhaustion experienced by families waiting for hope become the real subjects behind the drama. The hostage situation isn't presented simply as entertainment. Instead, it works as an emotional metaphor for what happens when someone believes every door has already been closed. One thing I appreciated is that the film never forgets who the emotional center of the story really is. Even during the most intense scenes, everything still revolves around Noah. He's never treated as just a reason for the plot to exist. He's a child with dreams, fears, friendships, and moments of innocence that remind us exactly what's at stake. Those quieter interactions inside the children's hospital often become more emotional than the louder confrontations later in the movie because they feel honest and painfully real. The performances continue carrying much of the emotional weight. Nawell Madani fully commits to portraying a mother who is emotionally exhausted but refuses to surrender hope. Whether or not every decision Jada makes feels realistic, the fear behind those decisions almost always feels believable. You can sense the panic growing scene after scene, and that emotional consistency helps keep the audience invested even when the plot becomes more extreme. Guillaume also delivers a restrained performance as Paul. Instead of trying to become the hero, he represents another parent struggling with guilt, helplessness, and regret. Their relationship isn't perfect, and the movie doesn't pretend that years of emotional distance can disappear overnight. Visually, Nothing to Lose doesn't rely on flashy cinematography or expensive action sequences. Most of its tension comes from confined hospital spaces, close-up performances, and the feeling that every passing minute matters. The camera often stays close to the characters, allowing facial expressions to communicate emotions that dialogue doesn't always need to explain. That grounded visual style makes the hospital feel less like a movie set and more like a place where impossible decisions are being made every single day. By this point, I wasn't thinking about whether Jada would succeed. I was thinking about the uncomfortable questions the story was asking. How far should a parent be willing to go? Can desperation ever justify dangerous action? And when a system cannot provide immediate answers, where does responsibility truly belong? Whether you agree with the movie's message or not, I think those questions are exactly what make Nothing to Lose more than just another emotional drama. They stay with you long after individual scenes have ended. Looking back at the entire experience, I think Nothing to Lose succeeds most when it focuses on the emotional reality behind its story rather than the dramatic events themselves. At its core, this isn't really a movie about a hostage situation. It's about what overwhelming fear can do to an ordinary person when every passing hour feels like another step closer to losing someone they love. And that's the emotional truth that gives the movie its strongest moments. From a filmmaking perspective, the performances carry almost everything. Nawell Madani gives the kind of performance that keeps you emotionally invested, even when the plot occasionally stretches credibility. You may not agree with every decision Jada makes, but you almost always understand why she's making it. That's an important difference because the movie asks for empathy rather than approval. Guillaume also brings quiet emotional weight to Paul's character, showing a father struggling with guilt, helplessness, and regret. Their relationship isn't perfect, and the movie doesn't pretend that years of emotional distance can disappear overnight. Another reason this movie stands out is that it constantly blurs the line between emotional drama and social commentary. While the story is built around one family's heartbreaking situation, it also encourages viewers to think about the bigger picture. The film raises uncomfortable questions about rare disease research, donor awareness, and the emotional burden carried by families waiting for hope. Rather than offering easy solutions, the movie focuses on the emotional consequences of living through that uncertainty. One thing I appreciated is that the film avoids turning every medical professional into the enemy. The doctors and nurses are shown trying to save lives while working within the limits of a system they don't fully control. That makes the conflict feel more realistic because the real frustration isn't directed at one individual, it's directed at circumstances that no single person can easily fix. I also liked how the movie keeps returning to the emotional bond between Jada and Noah. Even during the most stressful moments, their relationship remains the heart of the story. The quieter conversations, small moments of hope, and simple acts of love often leave a stronger impression than the scenes designed to create suspense. Those moments remind us that beneath all the headlines and dramatic decisions is simply a mother trying to protect her child. At the same time, I do understand why some critics have been divided on this film. The biggest criticism is the balance between its two very different halves. The first half moves slowly, carefully building emotion and character relationships, while the second half suddenly becomes much more intense and dramatic. For some viewers, that contrast makes the story feel emotionally powerful because it reflects how quickly real life changed. For others, it may feel like two different movies joined together. I think that's a fair discussion because both reactions are understandable. Another point worth mentioning is that the movie occasionally asks the audience to accept situations that may feel larger than life. Without giving away any spoilers, some developments require a little suspensive believability. Whether those moments work for you will probably depend on how emotionally invested
you've become in Jada's journey. If you've connected with her as a character, you're more likely to accept the film's dramatic choices. If not, those same scenes may feel difficult to believe. From a directing standpoint, I respect that Ludovic Colbeau-Justin and Nawell Madani never lose sight of the emotional objective. Even when the movie becomes more suspenseful, it never forgets that this is ultimately a story about fear, hope, grief, and unconditional love. The directors aren't trying to create a traditional crime thriller. They're using extraordinary circumstances to explore what desperation can look like when a parent believes time has completely run out. Technically, the film also deserves deserves credit for its grounded production style. The cinematography doesn't distract with unnecessary visual tricks, the editing keeps the emotional momentum steady, and the music generally supports the scenes without overwhelming them. Everything feels designed to keep the audience emotionally connected rather than visually distracted. By this stage of the movie, I wasn't watching just to see how the situation would end. I was watching because I genuinely cared about the emotional cost every character would have to pay, regardless of the outcome. And for me, that's one of the clearest signs that the movie succeeds where it matters most. Looking back at the entire experience, I think Nothing to Lose succeeds most when it focuses on the emotional reality behind its story rather than the dramatic events themselves. At its core, this isn't really a movie about a hostage situation. It's about what overwhelming fear can do to an ordinary person when every passing hour feels like another step closer to losing someone they love. That emotional truth is what gives the film its strongest moments. From a filmmaking perspective, the performances carry almost everything. Nawell Madani gives the kind of performance that keeps you emotionally invested, even when the plot occasionally stretches credibility. You may not agree with every decision Jada makes, but you almost always understand why she's making. That's an important difference because the movie asks for empathy rather than approval. Guillaume also brings quiet emotional weight to Paul's character, showing a father struggling with guilt and helplessness instead of trying to become a traditional hero. Together, they create a believable portrait of two parents facing the worst nightmare imaginable. I also appreciated that the movie shines a light on issues many people rarely think about until they're personally affected. Bone marrow donation, rare childhood cancers, and the emotional burden carried by families waiting for hope are all handled with genuine sincerity. Even if the story becomes more dramatic than real life at times, the message behind it feels authentic. If this film encourages even a few viewers to learn more about becoming a bone marrow donor, then it has already achieved something meaningful beyond entertainment. That said, I do think the movie has noticeable flaws. The pacing during the first half may feel too slow for viewers expecting a thriller, while the second half moves so dramatically that the tonal shift can feel surprising. Some emotional moments are incredibly effective, while others ask the audience to accept situations that may feel less believable. Because of that imbalance, I don't think this movie will connect with everyone the same way. If you're looking for non-stop action, this probably isn't the movie you're expecting. But if you enjoy emotionally driven dramas that explore difficult moral questions, strong parental love, and the human cost of an imperfect healthcare system, I believe Nothing to Lose offers a thought-provoking experience that's worth discussing long after the credits roll. My final rating is 7.9 out of 10. It's an emotionally committed drama with powerful performances and an important message, even if its storytelling doesn't always maintain the same level of realism throughout. Now, I'd love to hear from you. If you've watched Nothing to Lose, what did you think was the film's most powerful moment without giving away any major spoilers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this review, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who enjoys emotional dramas inspired by real-world issues. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next review.